When my son told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It was not the kind of smile that comes from bravery, nor the kind that hides anger. It was a fragile, trembling smile, one born out of exhaustion, acceptance, and the quiet understanding that some battles cannot be won, no matter how much truth you carry in your heart. I had learned this lesson slowly, over years of watching small misunderstandings become arguments, and arguments become distance. I had watched the girl I once welcomed warmly into my home grow colder, more guarded, more resentful over time, and somewhere along the way, she had woven a story about me, one in which I was the villain. The day he asked me to leave, it was late afternoon, the kind where the sun seemed too gentle, too warm, too peaceful for such a moment. The light fell across the floorboards like gold, but I felt none of its warmth. My son stood in front of me, shoulders tense, his eyes uncertain. He looked conflicted, hesitant, but firm enough to let me know that his mind had been made up long before he spoke. Maybe it's better if you stay somewhere else for a while, Mom, he said quietly. A simple sentence, soft, gentle, deadly. My heart tightened, but my face remained calm. I held the teacup in my hands, its warmth useless against the coldness spreading through my chest. Inside, something broke quietly, without sound, like a thin piece of glass finally giving way. I looked at him, trying to find the boy I once knew, the child who used to run toward me when he was scared, who hid behind my sari during thunderstorms, who believed that I could fix anything. But he wasn't that boy anymore. And perhaps that was the most painful part, realizing that the little arms that once wrapped around me had grown into hands that now pushed me away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse me. He simply repeated the words she had fed him softly, uncertainly, but enough to change everything. She says you make her uncomfortable, that you judge her. She says you're not happy with the way she runs the house. She feels pressured when you're around. Each sentence felt like a cut. Small, precise, perfectly placed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him the truth, the real truth, the one buried beneath all the lies she had woven. But I didn't, because I could see in his eyes that the seed of doubt had already been planted. She had watered it with careful tears and half-truths, nurturing it until it grew into something stronger than all my years of love. I took a slow breath. My voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. If that's what you want, I will go. He nodded, relieved and guilty at the same time, as if my calmness made it easier for him to be brave. I didn't blame him, not then, not even now, when I think back on it, because sometimes even the kindest hearts fall for the wrong story, especially when it is told with the right amount of emotion. I walked into the kitchen, the one I had cleaned, cooked in, and prayed in for years. Every corner held memories, some warm, some sharp, some faded by time. The silence pressed against me, heavier than ever before. I placed the cup in the sink, my hands trembling, and in that moment, I realized something that shook me deeply. Sometimes the people we love the most can become strangers, not because they changed suddenly, but because they grew slowly into someone we no longer recognize. As I stood there, gripping the counter to keep myself steady, I heard footsteps. They weren't my son's, they were hers, light, quick, and careful. She stopped, near the doorway, watching me silently. Her expression was unreadable. For a moment, we simply stood in the same room, breathing the same air, yet living in two different worlds. A world where she had won, and a world where I had lost. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharp, victorious, final. I felt a deep ache spreading through my chest, not just the pain of being told to leave, but the pain of understanding why. She had pushed me out slowly, strategically, quietly, and my son, with all his good intentions and soft heart, had believed what she wanted him to believe. As I walked past her, I whispered a small prayer. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for peace, for myself, for my heart, for the part of me that needed to survive this moment. I went to my room and began to fold the few clothes I would take with me. My hands moved on their own, mechanically, as if they belonged to someone else. Each piece of clothing held stories, laughter, and days long gone. I paused at a shawl one my son had given me years ago. A lump formed in my throat. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let my eyes close for a moment. The silence wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. That silence taught me more in that moment than years of words ever had. It taught me that truth does not always win. It taught me that love cannot always protect you. It taught me that the heart can break quietly, without a sound, and no one will notice. When I finally stood up, I looked in the mirror. I saw a woman who had carried her family for decades through struggles, through sacrifices, through every joy and sorrow. But in that reflection, I also saw someone who was tired of explaining, tired of defending, tired of proving her worth in a home she had built with her own hands. That was when I made a promise to myself. You cannot control what others choose to believe. You can only control how you carry yourself through the storm. It was a simple promise, but it became the thread that held me together in the weeks and months that followed. When I finally stepped outside, suitcase in hand, my son followed me to the door. He hugged me briefly, awkwardly, as if unsure whether he was doing the right thing. The embrace was weak, nothing like the hugs he used to give me when he was a boy. Mom, it's temporary, he whispered. We both knew he didn't believe that. And yet, I nodded, because sometimes love is not defending yourself. Sometimes love is leaving quietly so the people you care about can believe whatever brings them peace. I walked down the steps slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. The air outside was cool, but it felt kinder than the walls behind me. As I reached the gate, I turned around one last time. The house looked the same paint, same windows, same garden, but something inside it had changed forever. The warmth was gone. The laughter was gone. The sense of belonging was gone. I whispered under my breath, let it go with grace. And so I walked away. But the real battle began only after I left, because the hardest battles are not fought with words. They are fought with your own heart, with the memories that return at night, with the questions that never get answers, with the pain that others cannot see. That day, I learned that strength is not always loud. Sometimes, strength is choosing silence, choosing dignity, choosing peace instead of proving a point. And as I stepped into a new chapter of my life, I carried one truth with me. Sometimes the people we love believe the wrong story, but we do not have to break ourselves trying to rewrite it. My son, Arman, had always been the brightest part of my life. From the moment he entered the world, tinny warm, and crying loudly as if announcing his arrival to the universe, I felt a love so deep it terrified me. People say a child changes a woman, makes her softer, more vulnerable. But Arman didn't just change me, he anchored me. He became the reason I woke up with purpose. The reason I smiled even on days when exhaustion felt heavy in my bones. He was mine, my whole world, tucked in my arms. I remember the way his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, gripping tightly as if promising, I'm here, Mama. Even as a toddler, he had a softness in his eyes that reminded me of his father, gentle, patient, and full of unspoken emotion. When he smiled, it felt like sunlight entering a dim room, brightening everything it touched. I remember how he would run into my arms after school, his backpack bouncing behind him, his laughter echoing through the whole house. He would talk non-stop, telling me stories about his teachers, his friends, even the stray cat that lived outside the school gate. In those days, our little home felt huge, filled with dreams, stories, and childish chatter. I would stand by the kitchen door sometimes, watching him hop around the living room, thinking, this is happiness, this is everything. A mother always thinks those moments will last forever. As Arman grew older, he became more thoughtful, more introspective. He started asking questions most boys his age didn't, questions about people, about emotions, about how to become a good man. I still remember the afternoon he came home upset because he had seen a classmate being bullied. He sat beside me, his brows knitted, his voice trembling slightly as he said, why do people hurt others for fun? Doesn't it hurt their hearts? I looked at him, my young boy with an old soul, and I felt proud and afraid at the same time. Proud because he had empathy, afraid because I knew this world wasn't always kind to gentle hearts. He listened intently when I spoke, absorbing every word like it mattered. Sometimes, while I cooked, I would catch him staring at me, his face soft, thoughtful. What? I would laugh, pretending to be annoyed. Nothing, he'd say, grinning. Just, you look tired today. Let me help. And he would help always, washing dishes, chopping vegetables, sweeping the floor, not because I asked him, but because that's the kind of son he was. He wasn't just my child. He was my companion, my helper, my comfort. As he stepped into adulthood, I hoped, with all my heart, that he would find someone who understood him, someone who saw his kindness, his gentle nature, the way he thought 10 steps ahead when it came to other people's feelings, a partner who would love not just the man he had become, but the boy he had once been, the boy I had raised with sleepless nights, sacrifices, and silent prayers whispered into the darkness. When Aisha came into our lives, I felt a warmth I hadn't expected. She entered like a pleasant summer breeze, gentle, charming, and carrying a quiet confidence. Her smile was soft, her eyes expressive, and she had a way of speaking that made you feel listened to, truly listened to. It was the kind of presence that made the home feel fuller, livelier. The first time Arman introduced her, I studied her carefully, trying to understand the girl who had captured my son's heart. She brought a box of sweets, shyly placing it on the table. "Auntie, I made this at home," she said, her cheeks slightly pink. "I hope you like it." "Oh, you cook?" I had replied, pleasantly surprised. She nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I love cooking, especially trying new recipes." It was such a small thing, but something inside me relaxed that day. I welcomed her with open arms, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely liked her. I wanted her to feel at home, to feel loved, to feel part of us. Soon, she began visiting regularly. She laughed in our living room, her bangles tinkling softly as she poured tea. She called me Mom, and though the word startled me at first, the weight of it, the intimacy of it, I grew used to it, even cherished it. It was comforting, hearing that word from someone who seemed kind, respectful, eager to be part of our family. We developed small routines, tiny rituals that stitched our lives together. Sometimes we cooked side by side, our laughter mixing with the sound of sizzling pans. Other times, we sat quietly on the balcony, watching the street below, talking about everything and nothing, all at once. Women's talk, heart talk, future talk. One memory stands out: the day she cooked for me the first time. I sat at the dining table as she moved around the kitchen, tasting the curry, adjusting the salt, nervously wiping her hands on her apron. Every few minutes, she glanced at me, as if checking whether she was doing things right. When she finally placed the dish in front of me, a simple chicken curry, I could feel her anticipation. "I hope you like it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tasted it slowly, letting the flavors settle. It wasn't perfect. The salt was slightly less, the masala a little strong, but the effort, the love was unmistakable. "It's perfect, my dear," I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "Truly." Her face lit up with relief and joy, and in that moment, I felt something maternal rise inside me. I thought she was the daughter I never had. Arman and Aisha married in a small ceremony surrounded by close family. I helped with everything: the flower arrangements, the menu, the guest list, even Aisha's jewelry selection. I ironed Arman's sherwani myself, pressing out each wrinkle with the same care I used when he was a boy preparing for school events. During the ceremony, when the time came to give Arman away, my heart twisted. I held his hand tightly, whispering, "You will always be my son, always." He squeezed back, "I know, Mom, I love you." I cried tears of joy, of nostalgia, of hope. Everything felt perfect. For the first few years, life truly was beautiful. Our home echoed with laughter, Aisha's playful teasing, Arman's deep chuckles, the clatter of dishes during family dinners. We celebrated birthdays with music, festivals with lights, and ordinary evenings with tea and gossip. Sometimes I would watch them together and feel a quiet gratitude that God had blessed my son with a partner who seemed genuinely good, genuinely loving. Aisha and I grew closer, so I believed. We shared recipes, stories from our childhoods, and private thoughts. She told me about her dreams, her fears, her ambitions. I advised her when she asked, encouraged her when she doubted herself. She had become part of my routine, part of my emotions, part of my life. Sometimes we would sit in the living room, sipping tea in comfortable silence, while Arman played with the neighbors' children outside. Those moments felt like everything I had prayed for: a complete family, peaceful, warm, full of love. But life has a way of shifting quietly, almost invisibly at first. The changes came slowly, so slowly that I questioned myself more than I questioned the situation. Aisha became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped joining me in the kitchen. She spent more time in her room, shutting the door softly behind her. I began hearing whispered conversations late at night, her voice low but tense. At first, I dismissed it. She must be stressed, I told myself. Marriage is an adjustment. Maybe she needs space. I wanted to give her that space. I wanted to respect her boundaries. But the knot in my chest tightened every day. Small things began to feel different. During meals, she would barely meet my eyes. If I suggested adding a bit more salt to the dish, or reminded her that the laundry was still hanging outside, her smile would stiffen, her shoulders tightening. "Oh, she would say curtly, "I'll do it later." Her tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't warm either. The softness that once lived in her voice had slowly faded, replaced by something sharp, something guarded. A simple comment could suddenly change the air in the room. One afternoon, I gently mentioned that the doll was slightly overcooked. It wasn't criticism, just casual conversation. Her face fell instantly, her jaw tightening. "Maybe you should cook then," she muttered. I blinked, taken aback. She had never spoken to me like that before. When I looked at her, she was already walking away. Another day, I offered her tea. She shook her head without looking at me, murmuring, "No thank you," in a way that felt practiced, distant. I tried again and again to reach out. I brought her small gifts, hair clips, a new spice blend she once said she wanted to try, a shawl she admired in the market. She thanked me politely, but without the old warmth. The light in her eyes had changed. Armand, too, began changing. He started coming home later, his face tired, his conversations shorter. When I mentioned Aisha's distance, he brushed it off. "She's just tired, Mom," he said. "Work is stressful." "But she barely eats with us anymore," I whispered. "She's thinking a lot lately." "Don't worry." He always said the same thing. Don't worry. But how could I not? Sometimes I caught them whispering in their room, their voices tense. Sometimes Aisha walked past me, as if she was in a hurry to leave the room I was in. Sometimes Armin avoided eye contact when I asked if everything was okay. There were evenings when the silence in the house felt heavy, thick enough to touch. The laughter that once filled every corner had faded, replaced by something unspoken and cold. Still, I kept trying. I cooked her favorite meals, cleaned her room when she wasn't home, folded her laundry, and made sure her tea was warm when she came back from work. I tried to create moments where we could reconnect. "Come sit with me," I would say sometimes. "Maybe later," she replied, but later rarely came. And yet, despite everything, I kept telling myself, "Just wait, this phase will pass. She will open up again." But deep inside, I felt the shift, the quiet, painful distance growing like a shadow that stretched from one side of the house to the other. I didn't know it then, but those early whispers, those small cracks, were the beginning of something far bigger. Something that would eventually break the home I had spent my whole life building. The first real sign came one rainy evening. The sky had darkened earlier than usual, heavy clouds pressing down as though they carried the weight I would soon feel in my chest. Armand was out, running errands for work, and I was folding laundry in the living room, the soft white light of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. The rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, a soothing sound that usually calmed me. It had always felt like a lullaby after a long day, a steady reminder that life outside the home continued, gently, predictably. But that day, the rain was only a backdrop to something I was never prepared to witness. I heard Ayaz's voice from down the hall, low, tense, and unfamiliar. She must have thought I was upstairs, because she wasn't trying to whisper. My heart skipped a beat, and I paused mid-fold, a shirt half folded in my hands. The soft cotton slipped from my fingers, landing on the pile of laundry with a muted thud. My ears strained, trying to catch what she was saying. I couldn't make out everything, but one sentence came through with chilling clarity. "I just don't think we need her here anymore." The words sliced through the quiet room like a knife, sharp, cold, and deliberate. She couldn't possibly be talking about me. Could she? I stood frozen, my chest tightening, my fingers clutching the remaining shirts, as if holding on could anchor me. The room felt suddenly cold, even though the radiator hummed warmly at my feet. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. For a moment, I thought my legs might give way beneath me. I waited, hoping desperately that I had misheard her, that the words had been misdirected, that they were about someone else entirely. But the silence that followed told me otherwise. The only sound was the rain, tapping steadily against the window pane, a monotonous reminder that the world outside went on, indifferent to the fracture forming inside my home. I didn't confront her. I didn't even move. I just stood there, staring at the wall, repeating her words in my mind over and over. "We don't need her here anymore." The echo seemed to hang in the air, growing heavier with each passing second. I tried to convince myself that she must be talking about someone else, a colleague, a friend, a relative, but the truth had a taste I couldn't ignore. It was unmistakable. The next day, I approached her gently, trying to pretend nothing had happened. "Aisha, can we sit and talk?" I asked, my voice soft, careful. She looked at me with eyes so cold, so unfamiliar, that I barely recognized her. "I'm busy, Mom." "Later," she replied, Her tone clipped, a faint edge of irritation threading through it, but there was no later. Not that day, not the next, not for weeks. The distance between us grew slowly, imperceptibly at first, like fog creeping through the hallways of our home. At first, it was subtle, a sigh when I walked into a room, a glance of irritation when I offered help, a polite but fleeting nod during meals. The small things accumulated, though, until even my footsteps seemed to irritate her. I began to walk more quietly, speak more softly, fearing that any movement might provoke her. I tried to tell myself it was just stress. She was young, marriage was new, life was overwhelming. Perhaps she simply needed time, but deep down, something uneasy began to take root in me, an ache that whispered that this was more than stress. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. It was something I always did when I needed comfort. My mother had taught me, and I had taught Armand. The rhythmic motion usually soothed me, grounding me in something familiar, giving my hands purpose and my mind focus. The smell of flour dusted the air, warm and faintly sweet, and the slight resistance under my fingers was always calming. Today, though, the comfort didn't come. Aisha walked in. I smiled at her, a small gesture, hopeful for even a moment of connection. She glanced at me briefly, eyes hard, lips pressed together, and said sharply, "Mom, you should stay out of things that aren't your business." I froze mid-motion, hands covered with flour, fingers sinking into the dough. Her words echoed inside my mind, reverberating like a bell in an empty room. "Okay, I'll be careful," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't respond. She walked past me, grabbed a glass of water, and left the kitchen as if I didn't exist. Inside, something broke quietly, irreversibly. A thread snapped, an invisible line that I had thought unbreakable. I tried talking to Armand that evening. He sat on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, shoulders slumped from the long day, face tired from work. "Armand, is everything okay between you and Aisha?" I asked gently, trying to sound calm, normal, unaccusatory. He didn't look up. He just waved his hand dismissively. "Mom, stop worrying. She's just stressed with work." I didn't push. I didn't want to add to his burden, but I felt a growing sense of being pushed out of my own home, of becoming an outsider in the family I had built with love. Whispers began to reach me next. A neighbor mentioned seeing Aisha meeting someone in the park late at night. She looked upset. The neighbor said quietly, "Is everything all right at home?" A friend who visited once whispered the same, their voice almost conspiratorial. "She seems distant. Is she all right?" Each remark felt like salt rubbed into a wound that I didn't know how to describe. I wanted to confront Aisha, demand an explanation, demand the truth, but I couldn't summon the courage. The fear of hearing the answer, the fear of losing the fragile connection that remained, was too great. At night, I found myself sitting by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. The soft orange glow blurred through my tears. I held a cup of warm tea in my hands, more for comfort than taste, and whispered into the quiet, "What did I do wrong?" I replayed everything in my mind. The festivals we celebrated together, her calling me mom with a smile, our long talks over tea, the times she hugged me, the times she laughed at Armin's childhood stories. None of it made sense. How could love turn so quickly into coldness? How could warmth fade into silence? Arguments didn't start loudly. They started subtly. A clipped tone, a sigh, an eye roll, a door slammed a little too hard. She began avoiding meals at the table. Some days, she would say she had already eaten. Other days, she would quietly pack food, saying she had to meet someone, and leave before I could ask anything. The home, once filled with shared laughter and small joys, now felt like a house full of shadows. Even the furniture seemed quieter. Even the walls felt colder. One evening, something changed in Armin. He came home unusually late, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. I approached him carefully, almost trembling. "Is everything all right?" I asked softly. He hesitated, then said, "Mom, please don't misunderstand Aisha. She's just tired. She feels like maybe you misunderstand her sometimes." I felt my breath catch. "Misunderstand?" I repeated softly. How he rubbed his forehead, his expression wary. "I don't know. She just says you get involved too much sometimes. Maybe give her space." The words hit me like a blow. I stepped back, nodding slowly. "Of course," I whispered. "If that makes her comfortable." But inside, a deeper pain formed because I realized Aisha wasn't just pulling away. She was pulling Arman away with her. Days passed, then weeks. The distance grew faster. Aisha began locking her room when Arman wasn't home. She hid her phone when I walked by. She whispered on calls and stopped inviting me into conversations. I felt like a ghost wandering through my own home. Sometimes I would hear her laughing loud, carefree on the phone, a laugh she had stopped sharing with us long ago. Who was she laughing with? Why did she sound happier away from us than within the home? One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found Aisha hurriedly ending a call. She looked startled, almost guilty, as if she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. She put her phone face down on the table. When she looked up at me, her eyes weren't just cold, they were defensive, irritated, almost resentful. "Do you need something?" she asked sharply. "No. I was just getting my shawl," I whispered. She didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't soften. She just waited for me to leave. So I did. I began doubting everything, every word I spoke, every gesture I made, every step I took. I wondered if my presence bothered her, if my silence bothered her, if my kindness bothered her. I felt like every move was wrong. Some evenings, I wouldn't eat dinner, just to avoid being in the same room. Some mornings, I stayed in my room, longer, waiting to hear her footsteps leave the kitchen before I stepped out. I felt like an intruder, like a burden, like someone overstaying in a place where she no longer belonged. But the worst part was not Aisha's coldness. It was the change in Arman. He tried to stay neutral, but he seemed torn, less present, less open, less like the boy I had raised. Sometimes he defended Aisha without understanding the whole story. Other times he looked confused, caught between love for his mother and loyalty to his wife. And I, his mother, didn't want to burden him. So I swallowed my tears. I held my pain quietly. I told myself that all relationships go through difficult phases, but the truth was harder to face. I was losing him, slowly, quietly, without him even realizing it. The tension in the house grew, thicker, like a storm building overhead but refusing to break. Meals were eaten in silence. Rooms were passed without greetings. Nights were filled with whispers I wasn't meant to hear. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was betrayal, slow, quiet, creeping in like a shadow under a door, and I felt powerless. Every attempt I made to reach Aisha was met with silence, coldness, or sharp words designed to remind me I was unwanted. Every attempt to talk to Arman left me feeling smaller, like my voice was becoming faint in a house where it once mattered. Every night I cried quietly into my pillow, afraid of the day when everything would collapse, and slowly, painfully, I realized I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overthinking, I wasn't being sensitive. Something was breaking in our home, something important, something I had spent a lifetime building with love, and I could feel it slipping through my fingers no matter how tightly. I tried to hold on. That it was a late afternoon when everything finally came to a head, an afternoon that looked peaceful from the outside, the kind of day when sunlight filters softly through leaves, casting lazy shadows on the walls, when the neighborhood hums gently with the rhythm of life. But inside the walls of our home, everything was shifting, slipping, unraveling. The quiet outside was deceptive, a lie. Inside, tension clung to the corners like dust, settling over every piece of furniture. Every step I took, the house felt unusually quiet, not the normal, comforting quiet of early morning or late evening when everyone is content in their own spaces. This quiet was heavy, suffocating, as though the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for a confrontation I knew would come but dreaded anyway. The stillness was unsettling. Every creak in the wooden floorboards sounded like a footstep following me. Every soft rustle of fabric as I worked seemed magnified. Every distant sound from the street outside, the honk of a horn, the bark of a dog, the rumble of a passing car, pierced the silence like an accusation. I was in the bedroom, folding clothes that had been sitting untouched for days. My hands moved mechanically, folding and refolding the same shirt without noticing, trying to find solace in a task that had once brought comfort. Each fold was a rhythm, a pattern, a reminder that some things were predictable, controllable, but even that familiarity failed me. The motions felt hollow, my mind wandering, circling around her words, the cold tone of her voice, the distance that had grown like a shadow across our home. Arman was at work. Aisha had locked herself in her room hours ago, the door closing with the soft click of finality. The house no longer felt like a home, it felt like a place divided by invisible borders, an invisible battlefield where I had no role to play, no permission to tread. I was careful now, careful not to speak too much, careful not to walk too loudly, careful not to take up too much space. It hurt, but I had learned to swallow that pain quietly, storing it in the deep wells of my chest, where it throbbed silently, a constant, low ache. I had just placed a neatly folded shirt on the bed when I heard a soft knock on my door. "Mom, can we talk?" My heart skipped. It had been so long since she had addressed me gently, without a hint of irritation, without a carefully constructed wall of distance. The sound of her voice, soft and tentative, pierced through the fog of my anxieties. I turned slowly. Aisha stood at the doorway, her hand still on the knob. Her eyes were wet not from tears falling, but from the effort of holding them back, a fragile dam struggling to contain the flood. Her posture was tense, shoulders slightly hunched, as though she carried a burden too heavy to bear, a weight pressing down that I had no place in. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. "Yes, Beta," I said softly. "Come in." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a slow, deliberate movement that felt almost ceremonial, almost final. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stood there, fingers nervously twisting the edge of her deposit. She had never been the type to fidget. This alone told me something was terribly wrong. My chest tightened at the sight. Finally, she exhaled, the breath shaky and strained. "Mom," she began, her voice almost cracking, I don't think you should be here anymore." The words hit me like a slap, sharp, unexpected, paralyzing. I blinked once. My hands froze midair. The shirt I had held so carefully now slipped slightly, but I didn't notice. For a moment, the entire world fell silent. The floor seemed to shift beneath me. The walls seemed to close in. My heart didn't just beat, it exploded in my chest, hammering violently before dropping into a hollow pit that had opened inside me. But strangely, instead of crying or screaming or demanding an explanation, I felt a calmness wash over me, a kind of numb acceptance. The numbness that comes after weeks, months, of slowly breaking, of feeling small in the presence of the very people you have built your life around. A numbness that is not peace, not relief, but the quiet resignation of someone who has realized that some things are no longer theirs to control. I slowly placed the shirt on the bed. My fingers trembled, but my voice didn't understand. I whispered. Aisha looked startled. Maybe she expected an argument. Maybe she expected me to protest, to question, to force a confrontation. But I had no strength left for that. My energy had long been spent, worn down by months of coldness, clipped words, distant glances, the slow erosion of trust and warmth. Trying to keep my voice steady, I asked gently, "Why?" She looked away, eyes drifting to the floor. "It's complicated," she said after a long pause. "It's not just one thing. I can't have you in my life the way you used to be. The way you used to be." The words echoed in my mind like a haunting melody, a refrain I couldn't shake. What way was that? Loving, supporting, caring? I wanted to ask, but the words stuck in my throat. For a moment, the room became blurry, and before I could stop myself, a single tear slid down my cheek. It was small, quiet, and painfully honest. Aisha noticed it. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't reach out, didn't apologize, didn't soften. She simply stood still, watching me. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly, "but I need space. A lot of it." I nodded slowly. She needed space, even if that space meant pushing me out of her life. "I'll figure something out," I whispered. She simply nodded, then walked out of the room. The click of the door echoed in the emptiness, reverberating through the walls, through my chest, through my thoughts. The silence that followed was suffocating. It wrapped around me like a blanket made of thorns, each second sinking deeper into my skin, leaving a slow-burning ache I couldn't shake. The days that followed blurred together. Aisha avoided the house more than ever. She spent long hours outside, sometimes leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, her tone was distant, clipped, cautious, like she was speaking to a stranger she didn't want to upset. The meals that once brought us together, that had been the small rituals anchoring our home in warmth and familiarity, now felt like lonely, hollow exercises. Sometimes she skipped them entirely. Sometimes she ate in her room, the door closed softly behind her, her presence a ghostly whisper on the other side of a wall. Sometimes she didn't come home at all, an Armand too tired from work, too trusting, too accustomed to believing in the goodness of people, would simply say, "She's staying at a friend's house. She told me earlier," but I knew it wasn't just friends. Something else was happening, something unspoken, hidden, a quiet betrayal that I wasn't being told. Armand, though loving, seemed unaware of the weight pressing on our home. When I tried to talk to him gently about my worries, he brushed them aside. "Mom," he would say softly, "she's just going through a phase. Give her space." A phase. Such a simple word for something that was tearing me apart. But I didn't argue. I didn't want to add tension to his life. I didn't want him to feel caught between love for his mother and love for his wife. So I swallowed my pain, day after day, pretending it was small enough to manage, pretending that the sharp ache in my chest could be ignored, that the growing chasm between us could somehow heal itself. One Sunday morning, it was meant to be a peaceful day, a reprieve from the heaviness that had settled over the house. I decided to prepare breakfast for everyone. I woke early, letting the soft morning light brush my face, letting the quiet be my companion. I made Paratha's fried eggs, cut fruit, and set the table the way I used to when our mornings were filled with laughter, when Aisha would hum as she poured tea, when Armand's soft chuckle could fill the room. I wanted just for one date to feel normal again, to sit together, to talk, to remember that family was supposed to be warm. Armand came downstairs first. His hair was messy from sleep, his smile half awake but genuine, and he leaned forward to kiss my forehead. That one small gesture felt like a drop of water on parched land. "Breakfast is ready. Call Aisha," I asked softly. He nodded and picked up his phone. A minute later, it buzzed with a reply. Armand glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, then looked at me. "She said she's not coming," he said softly. "She said, don't wait for me." I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, not from disappointment, but from a deep, aching sadness. I looked at the plate I had placed for her, the neatly folded napkin, the warm paratha, the cup of tea still steaming. The empty chair stared back at me, a cruel reminder of how our family was changing, how our home was no longer whole. "Okay," I whispered, "we won't wait." Armand sat beside me, eating quietly. He could feel the heaviness in the room, but he didn't know how to fix it. And I didn't want him to feel responsible. As I ate, slowly, painfully, I couldn't help but wonder, had the warmth of our earlier days really been real, or had it all been temporary, fragile, destined to vanish like smoke in the wind? The days after that breakfast were marked by a new, deeper silence. Not just distance. This was the kind of silence that follows a storm, when the damage is clear but no one wants to look directly at it. Aisha no longer came home on weekends. She stopped responding to simple messages like, "Do you need anything?" She walked past me in the hallway with eyes that refused to meet mine. The sound of the front door closing behind her became familiar, to final, to much like a severing of ties. One evening, Armand came home exhausted, dropped his bag on the sofa, and sat down with a sigh. I approached him gently. "Armand, is Aisha okay? Has she said anything to you?" He rubbed his forehead, tired, frustrated, unsure. "Mom, she's just stressed. Don't take everything personally." I nodded, but inside I could feel something else, a slow, painful realization settling in. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't temporary. This was a turning point. The moment when things don't just bend, they break. And even though no door slammed, no shouting erupted, no argument exploded, something had changed forever. The next evening, I stood in front of my window, watching the sky shift from orange to purple, the way it always did at this hour. But today it seemed different, as if the world itself was aware of the fracture forming inside. A soft breeze came through the slightly open window, carrying the faint smell of evening jasmine. I closed my eyes. My heart felt heavy. But there was something else, something new. A quiet understanding, a realization that maybe I needed to prepare myself, that maybe my place in this home was no longer secure, that maybe Aisha's words weren't a moment of anger, they were a warning of what was coming, a warning I could no longer ignore. The turning point wasn't a single moment, it was a series of small moments, quiet, painful, unavoidable, a pattern that finally revealed the truth. I was being pushed out, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. The home I loved was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. After that day, the day when Aisha quietly pushed me out of the place I once called home, I made a decision that felt both painful and necessary. I would not fight anymore. I would not beg for space in hearts that were already closing, and I would not let resentment shape the rest of my life. But the honesty is this. The first few weeks felt like walking through a slow, heavy fog. Each morning, I awoke to a house that was silent in a way that pressed against my chest, constricting me. I no longer heard footsteps in the hallway, no longer smelled Aisha's perfume drifting from her room, no longer heard Armin's laughter echoing downstairs. Even the ticking of the clock sounded hollow, each second stretching endlessly, magnifying the emptiness. The house, once full of voices and small, everyday joys, had become an echo chamber, an oppressive space that reflected only the absence of what once was. I wandered from room to room, my fingers brushing over objects as if they still carried a trace of warmth. Armand's childhood books, their spines cracked with age, were lined on the shelf like silent witnesses. Photographs on the wall showed a family smiling through moments frozen in time: birthdays, vacations, festive mornings, and each image now felt like a reminder of a world I no longer belonged to. I sat on the edge of my bed for hours sometimes, staring at the wardrobe door, frozen in indecision, my mind looping through memories I could neither rewrite nor forget. Some mornings, it took everything in me just to open the curtains and let sunlight in. Grief, especially grief caused by the living, has its own rhythm. It doesn't arrive suddenly, in a storm of tears or wails. It creeps in quietly, settles into the cracks, and stays, reshaping the home you thought you knew. The silence of the rooms became a mirror to the silence within me. I learned to move slowly, carefully, as if navigating a minefield of loss and unspoken words. I spent long afternoons in the kitchen, a space that had once been the heart of our home, the center of warmth and conversation. Even when the rest of the house felt alien, the smell of simmering lentils, rising dough, or frying parathas grounded me. Cooking for just myself, however, became a ritual of quiet heartbreak. I would chop vegetables with a mechanical precision, pause mid-motion, and realize I had no one to call to the table, no eager voices to break the solitude. Bread baking, once a joyful task, became a small exercise in generosity. Would wrap half of it and leave it with neighbors because I couldn't bear to see it go stale in my own kitchen. Each slice of bread carried a subtle ache, a reflection of the void beside me. And yet, even in that solitude, something unexpected began to bloom. One rainy evening, the sky dark with clouds, the soft drumming of raindrops on the window soothing in its own way, I noticed a blank notebook left on the counter. With no plan and little expectation, I opened it. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence. I miss the home we once had. From that line, a flood of words emerged. Thoughts, heartbreak, confusion, anger, and yes, hope. I wrote letters I never intended to send. Letters to Aisha, letters to Armand, letters to myself. I asked questions I knew had no answers, recounted memories I could neither rewrite nor fully let go of, and expressed feelings I had been too polite, too afraid to say aloud. The notebook became a mirror, reflecting not only what I had lost but also what remained: resilience, quiet courage, and a heart that refused to harden. The writing was slow at first, hesitant, a trickle of ink on pages that had known only emptiness, but gradually, the words gained strength, flowing into paragraphs, stories, reflections. Sometimes, I wrote while sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring out the window at rain-soaked streets. Other times, I wrote in the soft golden glow of sunrise, tea steaming beside me, the quiet chirping of birds keeping me company. Through writing, I found a voice I had feared lost. Slowly, gently, something inside me began to shift. One morning, sunlight spilled across the floor in soft, golden waves. I sat with my tea, feeling its warmth seep into my fingers, and realized something essential. Forgiveness was not for them. Holding on to anger, resentment, or the need for explanation would only chain me to a story that no longer belonged to me. I needed to free myself from expectation, from disappointment, from the desire to be seen or understood by someone who had already turned away. I began with small gestures. Each morning, after making tea, I would sit by the window and intentionally notice one beautiful thing. Sometimes it was the deep green of leaves in the garden, still shimmering with morning dew. Sometimes it was the delicate warmth of sunlight as it spilled across the balcony floor. Sometimes it was the way the dust sparkled when it caught the light just right, like tiny stars suspended in air. These acts of observation became rituals of mindfulness, small anchors pulling me back to life, reminding me that even in absence, the world carried beauty. Around this time, Armin began to reach out in subtle ways. He sensed a shift, though he did not yet understand the depth or the cause. One afternoon, he wandered into the kitchen, tired from school and work, rubbing his forehead in a familiar gesture of worry. He sat across from me, his eyes hesitant but searching. "Mom," he said softly, voice low, "I don't understand her sometimes." I looked up at him, heart aching and tender, all at once. He wasn't asking for solutions. He was asking for reassurance, for comfort. I nodded gently, keeping my voice calm, even as memories of the weeks of distance rose to the surface. "I know," I said softly. "Sometimes, people make choices we don't understand. Sometimes, they carry battles inside them that we can't see. But that doesn't change the love we feel for the people we care about." He watched me quietly, absorbing the words, as if seeing me anew. In that moment, I realized that even if Aisha had closed her heart to me, I did not have to lose my connection with my son. But I also did not need to cling to him with fear or desperation. I could love him openly, freely, without trying to control the narrative of our lives. It was a turning point for both of us. From then on, I focused on myself. I stitched myself back together slowly, with intention. Mornings were spent in the garden. Flowers I had planted months ago, as jasmine, marigolds had begun to bloom despite harsh weather. I spoke to them softly as I tended to them, observing the resilience in their growth. In caring for them, I recognized the parallel in myself. Life, even after storms, continues to grow. I began a gratitude notebook, writing down 3 small joys each day: the smell of freshly baked bread, the soft tap of rain on the roof, a message from a long-lost friend, a child waving across the street, the golden hues of a sunset. Each note was a tether to the present, a gentle reminder that life, even amid loss, held beauty and kindness. Months passed in this quiet rhythm. The pain of absence remained, but it softened, becoming a background hum rather than a loud, piercing ache. Then, unexpectedly, Aisha returned one evening. The door opened, and she stood in the frame, different, quieter, subdued, without tension in her shoulders. There was no anger, no demand, and yet no apology either. Just a soft, tired stillness. "Would you like tea?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. I prepared it quietly, placing the warm cup in front of her. She held it, the heat seeping into her palms, and sipped without speaking. We did not discuss the past, and I did not ask her to. She stayed only a few minutes before leaving again. The door closed softly behind her. And strangely, I felt no anger, no longing, no bitterness, just acceptance. My peace was no longer dependent on her acknowledgement or apology. I had finally reached a place where my sense of self, my dignity, my ability to feel whole, were independent of others' actions. I turned my attention to relationships that had remained steady: friends who sent quiet messages, neighbors who offered small acts of kindness, family members who reminded me of my worth. I began to attend community gatherings again, starting with small, intimate events, tea stalls, garden shows, storytelling circles at the library. Initially, I felt shy and uncertain, hesitant to step back into a social world I had avoided. Gradually, I smiled, listened, and shared stories. Each interaction reminded me of the richness that still existed beyond the walls of my home. I learned that boundaries are a form of love. I could care deeply without sacrificing my dignity. I could be gentle without allowing myself to be mistreated. I could open my heart without letting it be trodden upon. Weeks became months. Slowly, the heaviness in my chest eased. Laughter returned, genuine, unpolished. I hummed while cooking. I sipped tea on the balcony, letting the breeze brush against my face. And in this slow recovery, gratitude deepened, not for the pain, but for what it had taught me. Betrayal had not broken me. It had reshaped me, stronger, quieter, more compassionate. Armin and I rebuilt a closeness that was new and gentle. We cooked together, walked through the garden, and sometimes sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea. We did not speak of the past's wounds. They were not erased, but they no longer defined us. And in that quiet, gentle, new beginning, I realized something profound. Healing does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives like dawn, slowly, gradually, until you notice one day that the darkness has lifted. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the breath you didn't realize you'd been holding, but it arrives, and when it does, the heart finds its way back to light. Looking back now, I can finally see the full arc of that difficult chapter with clear eyes. What once felt like a storm that would swallow me whole has softened into something I can examine with understanding, even gratitude. It began with shock, grew through tension and heartbreak, and eventually settled into a quiet acceptance I never expected to find. There were days when I could barely breathe beneath the weight of confusion and betrayal. Days when I wished desperately for things to return to how they once were. But life doesn't work that way. Life moves forwards, sometimes gently, sometimes painfully, and we learn to move with it. I will never forget the day my daughter-in-law turned against me. Aisha had once been like a second daughter to me, warm, bright, full of hope. I had welcomed her into our home with open arms, believing she would add to our family's happiness, not take anything away. For years, she did just that. We cooked together, laughed together, shared stories and secrets like friends. I held her when she cried, encouraged her when she doubted herself, and prayed for her happiness as if she were my own child. And then, one day, without warning, something changed. She changed. Or maybe she finally revealed a part of herself I was not meant to see until the time came. The day she turned against me, the day she spoke words I still hesitate to remember, was the day I realized how quickly love can be twisted, how easily trust can be broken, and how deeply the people we care for can wound us. I remember standing in the hallway that evening, the light from the lamp casting long shadows on the walls, and feeling as though the house itself had shifted. Everything familiar felt foreign. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the wall clock, the faint echo of distant traffic. These everyday sounds had taken on an alien quality, underscoring the sudden dissonance within my home. I had felt like an intruder in my own life, watching it slip through my fingers while I could do nothing to hold it. But remembering that pain does not mean I remain trapped in it. It simply means I acknowledge it as part of my story. I have come to understand that life is rarely fair, rarely predictable, rarely neat. We cannot control the choices others make. We cannot force understanding where there is none. And we cannot demand loyalty from someone whose heart has drifted elsewhere. What we can do is hold on to ourselves, our own hearts, our own dignity, our own capacity for love. When everything around us collapses, these are the things that keep us standing. I learned to forgive silently, not because she apologized, not because she earned it, but because I needed it. Carrying resentment would have tied me forever to that painful moment, and I refused to live a life chained to bitterness. Forgiveness was not a gift to her, it was a gift to myself. A release, a quiet surrender of everything I could not change. And I learned something else. Letting go is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. It takes courage to release the hope that someone will return to who they once were. It takes courage to walk away from battles you know will only destroy you. It takes courage to accept that some doors must stay closed for the sake of your own peace. In the early days after Aisha withdrew, I discovered the subtle power of small routines. Every morning, I would prepare my tea with deliberate care, noticing the warmth of the cup against my palms, the faint steam curling upward. I would sit by the window, watching the world wake slowly, the sunlight spilling across rooftops, the leaves swaying in soft rhythm with the wind. These moments, though simple, were profound. They reminded me that life, in its quiet, persistent way, continued even when my heart felt fragmented. I found that solitude can be both cruel and compassionate. At first, the silence of the house felt oppressive, a reminder of absence and unmet expectations, but gradually, I learned to hear within it a different voice, the voice of my own heart, unhurried, unjudged, free to explore thoughts that had long been crowded by responsibility and worry. I began keeping a journal, recording memories, reflections, and observations. The act of writing became a ritual of clarity, a way to untangle emotions and witness my own resilience. Sometimes, late at night, I would read over old letters I had written but never sent. Some were full of quiet grief. Some carried questions I knew would remain unanswered. Some simply expressed love I could no longer freely share. Each line, each word, became a bridge from my past to the present, a reminder that even pain has a purpose if we are willing to learn from it. I also returned to the garden, tending the plants with care I had once reserved for family gatherings. Flowers, even after harsh rains, continued to bloom. The jasmine I planted years ago now climbed the trellis in stubborn beauty, its scent filling the air with calm. The roses pushed through thorns, resilient and patient, a living metaphor for the way we endure. I talked to them softly, noticing the small miracle of life persisting, and in their steady growth, I found comfort and strength. Over time, My relationship with Armin grew into a new rhythm. We learned to sit together without forcing conversation, to share the same space without measuring absence. Sometimes we cooked together, he chopping vegetables while I stirred pots of simmering lentils. Sometimes we walked through the neighborhood in silence, enjoying the cool evening air. Sometimes we simply sat in the living room, watching the sunlight fade through the windows, finding that comfort could exist without words. I no longer needed him to see the pain I had endured or to offer explanations. Love, I discovered, could exist quietly, without control, without demand. I also began noticing the smaller, often overlooked joys of daily life. The laughter of children playing in the street, the scent of rain on the pavement after a long, dry spell, the warm greetings of neighbors and friends, the subtle, golden glow of evening sunlight turning mundane surfaces into small universes of color. These little moments reminded me that the world moves forward, that beauty persists even when life feels fragmented, that hope is not always loud or dramatic, but can appear softly, persistently, in the smallest details. Aisha returned briefly one evening. The sight of her standing in the doorway was unexpected. She looked subdued, quiet, almost tired. There was no confrontation, no apology, no explanation, only her presence, a reminder of the chapter we had both lived through. I offered her tea. She took it, holding the warmth in her hands as though it was a small shield. We did not discuss the past, and I did not ask her to. She stayed for a few minutes, then left, and strangely, I felt no anger, no longing, no bitterness. I realized that my peace no longer depended on her. My heart could breathe again, independent of another's choices. In the months that followed, I focused on relationships that remained constant. Old friends reappeared in gentle ways, checking in with a phone call, sharing a meal, or simply stopping by for tea. Neighbors offered small kindnesses, a loaf of freshly baked bread, a handful of mint leaves from their garden, a smile that said, "Without words, you are not alone." These acts, seemingly insignificant, became profound reminders of the goodness that persists in the world. Community gatherings became part of my routine. I joined tea circles, garden clubs, and local storytelling sessions. At first I felt shy, hesitant, unsure if I belonged. Gradually, I found my place, not at the center, not with grand gestures, but quietly, gently, with an open heart. I listened, shared small stories, laughed softly. Each interaction rebuilt my confidence, layer by layer, reminding me that life offers connection, even after loss. I discovered the power of boundaries, the quiet art of protecting my heart without shutting it down. I could care deeply, but without sacrificing dignity. I could be gentle, without allowing mistreatment. I could open myself to love, without clinging to the past or fearing its return. As weeks turned into months, the pain that once seemed unending softened into something manageable. I began laughing, again, real laughter, unpolished, spontaneous. I hummed as I baked bread, swept the floors, watered the plants. I found myself enjoying tea on the balcony, feeling the breeze brush against my face, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I had long ignored. Gratitude deepened within me, not for the pain itself, but for the lessons it had brought. Betrayal had not broken me, it had reshaped me. I had learned the quiet strength of endurance, the gentle power of forgiveness, and the delicate art of letting go. I had discovered that love is not about possession or expectation, but about presence and acceptance. Armin and I, once caught in the tension of divided loyalties, found a gentler closeness. He needed neither my guidance nor my protection. He was growing into his own person, as I was learning to be fully myself. Our love was no longer conditional or fraught with anxiety. It was patient, quiet, enduring, and in that quiet, enduring presence, I discovered a new rhythm for life. Healing does not arrive with fanfare. It does not announce itself with fireworks or sudden revelation. It seeps in like the tide, slowly, persistently, until one day, the ache in your chest has softened, the sharp edges of memory have dulled, and you can walk through the world with a heart that is open again. I realized, finally, that the greatest strength is not in resisting pain, not in demanding apologies, not in clinging to what was lost. The greatest strength is in standing, in breathing, in choosing to see the world, to see people, to see oneself with clarity, compassion, and quiet courage. Life, I have learned, continues, and so do we. Even in heartbreak, strength grows. Even in loss, love persists. Even when the people we cherish leave or betray us, life gives us the chance to rebuild, to heal, to love again, sometimes in ways we never imagined, sometimes in ways quieter but infinitely richer than before. And now, when I sit with my tea by the window, when I watch the sun rise over a world still moving, still breathing, I carry a deep, abiding peace, a peace that is hard-won, gentle, and enduring, a peace that reminds me, I have survived, I have loved, I have healed. This is the gift of the journey, the reward of the heart that refuses to harden, that continues to hope, that continues to notice beauty in the ordinary, that continues to rise with the sun, day after day. And that, I think, is the greatest lesson life has ever given me.